We're going to celebrate our 316th anniversary of worship here, not in this literal building, but on this site. The bit next door that is our hall was built in 1705, and there was an independent chapel just before that, but that was when the church was built here and worship began in this site predominantly.
Because we come from non-conformist stock. Yes. What is that all about?
It takes us back to the 17th century non-conformism. Non-conformism, yes. And that's...
1662?
1662 is the big date, yes. In August 1662, St Bartholomew's Day, I think something like the 24th of August, but certainly late August, was the date that Anglican priests were given to sign up to the articles and so on and so forth that they were told they had to abide by. And there were a number who dissented from that, who didn't want to sign up to it, and they weren't willing to sign up to it, and so they said they weren't going to, and they didn't. So on that date, on St Bartholomew's Day, they were thrown out. So, but for many, it was called Black Bartholomew's Day because they were thrown out of the Church of England, thrown out their living, lost all their money, their housing, etc., etc. And many of them went on to set up what we initially called independent chapels, and they worshipped there. They were predominantly often unable to be in the centre of communities, or not immediately, but later on. There was brought in the 5 Mile Act, I think it was, that you couldn't be within 5 miles of a local Anglican church. You had to have your church elsewhere. So that's why a lot of sort of late 17th century non-conformist chapels are outside of village centres and town centres because they weren't allowed to be near the parish church. They had to be a certain distance away.
Converted sort of farm buildings?
Oh, they often met all over the place, yeah. People's houses, farm buildings, barns. I mean, initially they weren't allowed to worship anywhere, and so they were hunted down, and sort of found out. So it was a dangerous thing to go and worship, but not in the established church. So some of our churches hark back to that. Skinner Street is a church that does date from 1662, Wareham slightly later in 1670, and we're a bit after that in 1705, but that's obviously why we're allowed to be so close to St Mary's, literally just down the hill, because it's that bit later and things were obviously a little bit more tolerable by then.
In spite of bombs?
And that was a bit later, 1940-something, a bomb came through the window there and went out the back wall there and took our organ away.
The organ.
But didn't do any other damage. But yes, so there's all sorts of interesting history in all churches, but our church is celebrating 316 years of people coming together here to worship, and we're still evolving and growing. We've got a nice new, as we've touched on before, nice newly refurbished worship space. We're valuing our history. We're thankful for those who've gone before us and built the place and worshipped here, but we're not stuck in that rut of we must keep everything exactly as it was in whatever date, because we're still seeking to evolve and grow and reach out to people today, in ways that, whatever way we can.
Because you're going to take us to John 15, the vine and the branches. Yeah, Jesus talking to his disciples. So, as you say, he says, I am the vine, you're the branches. Giving us a little analogy there. He likes to use pictures. Jesus often uses pictures, doesn't he, as he talks to people, because we grasp these things easily, don't we? And the vine would have been known to people, of course, in that culture. We perhaps don't know it as well in our culture, but that idea of all being part of the same plant and being grafted on and fed through the plant so that we can grow. And so that's that image of us being grafted onto Christ, and the Holy Spirit feeding and nourishing us, enable us to grow in our faith and our walk with Christ and doing our work for God. It starts off in a nice, comfortable thing where Jesus says, love one another, but that's not the full stop. It carries on, the sentence carries on, love one another as I have loved you. And maybe at that point it didn't seem very impressive to say love one another as I've loved you, because Jesus was just journeying around with people doing things, but actually as time went on he enacted the fact that he was the servant to them all. Although he was Christ, he was God's Son, he was still everyone's servant, and in time it took him to the cross, and that was the great expression of love that we see in Jesus. Love one another as I have loved you. Very sacrificial, very challenging, very difficult, if we're going to do it properly. No one
and to lay down his life for his friends. Yeah. Hopefully we're listening to God. Hopefully we're picking up on what the Spirit wants us to do, and working together as a fellowship of people, as part of God's family here in this place.
In the community.
To reach out to folk. It's not just about making sure we're okay. That's part of it. Of course it is. We want to make sure each and every person is as well as they can be, you know, as blessed as they can be. But it's not just about us inside the walls. It's about people outside as well, and what we can do for them, and how we can reach them with that love of God. Jesus said, "Come on, you know, I want you to have life and life in all its fullness." Actually, what a contrast that is, that sentence, to what many people think of the church as the church that doesn't want you to have fun, doesn't want you to know that people have this. There's a view out in culture, isn't there? Whether it's a bit of a parody or whatever, but that church doesn't allow fun. Church doesn't, you know, but actually, the message that Christ brings is, I want you to have life and life in all its fullness, the best that life can be.